The first thing I wanted to say, just because I got asked this all day yesterday, was whether we just work in cities. 10 years ago when we started, we did just work in cities, but now we work with local authorities of every shape and size and with organisations of every shape and size. So the city bit is a bit of a misnomer. So what does Happy City do? Our strapline is measuring what matters. So we try and help people to measure what matters to people and what matters to the future. And today I'm going to talk a little bit of background about what we do, but I'm also going to talk about the kind of growing movement which is being framed as the wellbeing economy movement, and also a couple of our data tools that try and help make it really practical to measure what matters for organisations today. So that's that slide already. So this is just a quote. I've got a couple of quotes in here. This is a quote from Joseph Stiglitz. So when you come from an organisation called Happy City, people expect it to be very light and fluffy, but he's a very far from light and fluffy guy. He was the former chief economist at the World Bank. And he said, if we measure the wrong things, we strive for the wrong things. And he was one of the very early voices in this sort of call, the idea that we need to go beyond GDP as a primary measure of progress, that somehow we need to think differently about what we're measuring and therefore what we're striving for. And this really helped found a lot of the movement that's become this kind of wellbeing economy space. And I think it's really important to say right up front that there's nothing about the work that we do or the work across this field that is saying that money or GDP in themselves, of course, aren't bad. There's nothing wrong with them. They're very vital parts of our world. It's just that they've become the end rather than the means. So they've become the end rather than the means to deliver prosperity. What's it for? What are we trying to grow the economy for? And a lot of our work is trying to help organisations and local places to think about what's the for, what's the purpose, and then focus on those things and use money and GDP growth as just one of many, many, many means to delivering that. So our current economic model uses this very, very nebulous idea of GDP growth as a kind of north star of progress. It's like a compass that we're using. And it basically asks the question, are we producing and consuming more stuff this year than last year? And it's somehow become a proxy for prosperity, for success, for well-being, a lot of the stuff we're talking about at the moment. And it guides decisions at every level of our society. It guides decisions about how we design our homes and our cities and our lives. And whilst this is very true at a societal level, it's really also fed down into the personal. I always think it's really, really interesting that what you hear about on the news is consumer confidence, as if somehow us being good consumers and having consumer confidence is more important than us just having confidence. And I think we've got these huge industries like advertising and so many different parts of our system are set up to kind of drip feed us a certain amount of unhappiness. So we're dissatisfied enough to think we need more. I'll be happy when I've got a new iPhone, or I'm a bit thinner, or I've got a better car or something. We're drip-fed this sense that we haven't quite got enough, because actually wanting more every single year, not just wanting to replace things, but actually wanting more, that's what GDP growth is, every single year is unnatural. So we need to be drip-fed it a little bit. It's almost, in a way, like your country needs you to shop, which is not necessarily how we like to think of our country's desires for us. And very importantly, apart from depleting individual happiness, which of course is very, very important, and of course depleting the planet's resources, huge reasons behind our current climate crisis is this huge drive for growing consumption all of the time. But it also, as I mentioned, seeps into all aspects of our lives. So healthcare becomes about efficiency savings, education is about creating job readiness, housing often becomes just merely an investment for profit, and the food is an industry. I mean, I can't even get my head around that. How is food as an industry? The care system and culture are costs to be managed or cut in this system. They're not seen as valuable, deeply important investments in value in and of themselves. And I could really go on. But anyway, so what is it and how is it that this simple measure like GDP growth can have such power? And does it really matter what we measure is what I want to talk about. This is another quote from one of my absolute favourite authors, somebody called Kate Raworth. She calls herself a renegade economist, and she's done quite a bit of work with us. And she says, we have an economy that grows whether or not we thrive. And what we need is an economy that thrives whether or not it grows. It's not anti-growth, it's not anti-anything. It's just saying, let's put our priorities right. Where are we going? And Happy Cities work is very much about developing new ways of measuring progress and assessing value where we are, in our homes, in our streets, in our communities, in our businesses, and in our local cities, towns and rural areas across the UK. And as I mentioned, this is now a really growing movement. It's really exciting. I'll mention a bit of the international work in a minute, but it's a really growing movement around shifting to a wellbeing economy. And we see our role in that is trying to make this really practical at a local level, because often when people hear about it and read the books, they get excited, but they're like, but Liz, we've got so many different pressures on us. How on earth are we going to try and shift this? So our role is to try and make that really, really practical if you're a tiny community group, or if you're a local authority, or if you're a national government. So we've been developing various different tools to try and do that. And I'm going to share a little bit about two of those tools today, not as some sort of sales pitch. We're a charity and not-for-profit. We're very, very mission-driven. But just to give you a sense of the fact that it is very, very possible and it's very practical at this stage in our economy's development. So the first of those tools is called the Thriving Places Index. And it's designed to help make that shift at a local level, to focus that compass, if you like, on the well-being of people, place and planet, and put that compass right at the heart of decision-making at a local level. As I mentioned, it's really designed to try and be really, really practical. How can we use this to make those decisions that we have to make every day? How can we judge ourselves, our politicians, our business leaders, on how well they are shifting this compass, rather than just merely shifting the compass of consumption? It's very much designed, this is the framework, you probably can't see that from the back, but I've thrown it up there. It's all online, there's huge amounts of stuff online about this. It's designed to answer three really, really simple, connected, but very important questions. Are we creating the right local conditions for people to thrive? That's absolutely at the heart of this framework. And are we doing that equitably? So more than just a few people are thriving. You can measure well-being and the number can go up, but actually just a few richer people are doing particularly well. And are we doing that sustainably so future generations can thrive? We can't be improving lives at the cost of the well-being of future generations. So that's the sort of headline, that local conditions, equity and sustainability. But we've broken that down underneath that into a whole range of different key factors that all of the research says most influences our ability to thrive, whether that's good jobs or community cohesion or green and blue spaces, health inequalities. Housing, of course, is deeply important in there. So it's got all of those key things that we know matter, but we've worked with some amazing academics, policymakers and community leaders right across the country for many, many years now to really understand what does the research tell us matters most to people's lives, measuring what matters. So we've tried to distill that into something that's quite practical. And below that, there are, I think, in the core framework, there are about 63 different individual indicators. So at that level, every community, every small project, every individual business can say, I'm shifting that bit of this framework. And collectively, we're developing a thriving place. It really, really supports that kind of cross-partner working. We publish the results for this every year, whether people like it or not, publish and be damned, for all 373 local authorities in England and Wales, and make all of that data accessible to try and shift the dial. But we also work much more in depth with quite a lot of those local authorities to try and really embed this very, very different way of working into how they work. And the data is being used. I mean, the ONS wellbeing results that they publish every year. This year and last year actually, they use the Thriving Places Index to try and explain the wellbeing differences across the UK. So even the ONS, who obviously everyone respects very much for their level of data, recognise that their headline wellbeing indicators can only tell you so much. So they use the TPI each year to try and understand, explain some of those inequalities that we see. So every place gets I've put up Cornwall's, very controversially, but anyway, I've put up Cornwall's that you've done very well, to be honest with you, so don't worry too much. But we put up Cornwall's scorecard here. Every place gets a headline scorecard so they can start communicating some of this changes to their population to try and really make it accessible. But underneath that, of course, there's a huge wealth of data to use. And people are using it, so they can use it partly as shared goals, a bit like the Smartline project. Lots of partners it takes to develop thriving places, business, community, health partners, etc. So it can really help be a shared set of goals for places. This is what we're trying to achieve together. And it helps people of every size, organisations of every size, see their role in that bigger change, and also to start digging into where best practice is, both locally, where's the best practice in these spaces, but also nationally. How is Bradford doing so well at that? How is Liverpool doing so well at that? Let's find out from others how we shift the areas where we are really struggling. But it's also a way for us to hold ourselves and our leaders to account. Why is it that the inequality is dramatically falling in some places? Why is it that we might be reducing unemployment, but the good jobs, the jobs that give people security or any sense of purpose, are not being delivered, or jobs with a living wage? We put detail in there that says it's not good enough just to chuck up jobs that are destroying people's lives. In-work poverty is growing by the day. So it's a way of holding ourselves to account and making decisions, and it's starting to be used in a very practical way. I'll come to some of those case studies in a minute. The second tool I wanted to mention is the Happiness Pulse. It's our main kind of personal and community wellbeing tool, and it really gets to the heart of how people are doing. It's all fine and well to say the conditions are good for people to thrive, but we also need to know, are people thriving? Those can be actually surprisingly different things because of the time lag in terms of changing the conditions. So this tool can really help individuals, organisations and whole places to start really doing the cycle of measuring, understanding, improve. What we measure is what we strive for. So let's start measuring the right things. Again, I'm going to give you a framework diagram that you may or may not be able to see. So there's 3 core domains in the Happiness Pulse, which the communities that we work in named them very helpfully for us, because we did have much more academic names for them. So they're named Be, Do and Connect, which, give or take, equate to mental and emotional well-being, behavioural well-being and social and relational well-being. In fact, the swim webs that Smartline have been using are very much there in the B domain. It took years of development of this project because we wanted it to be really accessible to people. We wanted it to be useful to mayors and big decision makers, but we wanted it to be useful to everyday citizens. So each person who takes their own pulse online or in a guided conversation gets their own results back instantly. They can click through and find out a little bit more about how to improve their own well-being. But it's also adaptable for organisations, so you can use it as a mapping tool to understand the well-being strengths and needs of any community, from a single street to a whole neighbourhood, from an individual organisation understanding the well-being of their teams, right the way through to a place-based change programme. We've also developed a range of different additional modules, so each time people answer questions about their own well-being, there's the opportunity to ask them some additional questions. There is like a community module that understands a little bit more about how people are interacting with their community, so you can start in the data to see the interactions between making an intervention at a community level and people's well-being. Start seeing how has that change impacted on people's belonging, or their sense of trust, or their sense of optimism in the future, or their level of physical health and well-being. We've also developed a housing one, very relevant to this audience, I suspect. So understanding what are the key things in the housing space, particularly social housing, but not exclusively, that really influence most people's capacity to thrive in their own lives, so that when housing associations or social housing providers are making changes, they can start seeing what element, not just are people feeling a bit happier, which is a nice thing to measure, but it's not getting to the heart of what does that mean? What differences are those things making to people's sense of purpose or worth, to their connection, to their sense of understanding and belonging in their community. So we've got a community module, a housing module, we've got a workplace one, very important for different workplaces. We've also got a sport and activity one, and we also do bespoke ones. So quite a lot of organisations, we work with some big national charities as well as tiny community ones. They're like, we've got this particular programme, we really want to understand the impact that programme is having on the wealth of information around wellbeing. Can you help us? So we create bespoke modules for them. It's super easy. We've spent a lot of time, we've got a lot of national lottery funding to try and make it really accessible. So literally any organisation can now go on, they create their own dashboard, they immediately get their own unique URL. The basic level's free, so if you're a really small community organisation and you just want to be measuring the social value of the work that you do, you want to measure before and after of a simple project, instantly you're off and running. If you're a bigger organisation and you want to break that down into different projects or different teams, we've kept it super low cost because we're passionate about making this out there. So we've got a slightly more complex one that we can offer where they can break it down into different teams. They can have these different modules. We can offer reporting and all the rest of it. All of it's really, really easy to use. People press a button and they've instantly got a report for their funders, for their communities, etc., etc. So it's there. It's really simple and useful to use, but it also gives back. I feel really passionately that evaluation is often a very extractive industry. It's like mining of oil. We go into these communities, particularly hard to reach or deprived neighbourhoods, etc., communities, and 15 different people are coming in every month, asking them lots of questions. And people just feel really, really, they feel quite bruised by it, if I'm honest. When we worked in all of those communities for so many years, we know that. So we've developed it to give back so that it feels useful to those communities, to those individuals. But it's also incredibly useful, of course, at scale when you get that kind of level and quality of data about what is impacting people's lives. So just to finish on a fairly optimistic note, a couple of slides about the fact that this isn't just a nice little pipe dream. We have been going for 10 years, but we're not sitting in a bubble in Bristol. It's absolutely growing by the minute, not just our work, but the work right across the movement. It's a really exciting time to be in this space. So we've been working particularly a lot across Wales, where you might have heard of their really, really innovative Future Generations Act, where they've put the well-being of current and future generations right at the heart of their legislature, so that everybody has to prove the well-being benefits of their work. So we do a lot of work there. We're currently doing a really interesting project right across Birmingham. In fact, yesterday really reminded me, because you're working with so many partners, this project is working with 180 different partners across Birmingham and Solihull. Excuse me. Let me just have a drink. I was talking too fast. Sorry. So the primary purpose is to get more people physically active and to understand what impact that has on well-being. And so they could have just measured how many people are running around the park. I mean, they could have been very simplistic about their measures. But instead, they're using a Thriving Places Index right across the programme to say, we know we're not just improving physical activity, we're improving social cohesion, we're improving use of public transport, we're improving green spaces, we're improving confidence and workability, we're improving education. So they're using the framework to say, look at the ripple effects. We're making these changes here, but we're impacting the whole of a place. It's really powerful. And then they're using the pulse right across their programme to understand the well-being impacts of their work. We're working with lots of different national funders, local funders, small charities, big charities, and also businesses. Thank God more and more businesses are waking up to the really, really important role they play in developing thriving places. And it's not just the UK. So we don't actually deliver elsewhere because we don't want to be colonialists, but we do a lot of advisory work elsewhere. There's a city in California that has completely put something very similar to the Thriving Places Index based on our work into their entire work. When I went and spoke at one of their conferences, you had the head of the Chamber of Commerce saying, my job is wellbeing. You had the head of the fire service saying, my job is wellbeing. The head of the police service saying, my job is wellbeing. They recognise that all of their jobs is about creating places for people to thrive. It was a really humbling experience. And in some places like India, they're literally building whole new cities based on the principles of wellbeing economics. Just to finish off, so it's more and more also getting into the news. So New Zealand, many of you will have heard of the amazing Jacinda Ardern, who is the leader at New Zealand. They have created a wellbeing budget, which is very similar to sort of work we do with local authorities. How do you take wellbeing measures and say, as the Treasury, and this is how the Treasury works there now, you do not get a penny from the Treasury in New Zealand unless you can demonstrate that what you're going to spend this money on is going to improve some of the sorts of indicators you saw earlier on. And that has had a profound effect already, even though it's only been going very, very short amount of time. A few other quotes. That's a huge amount of interesting work happening in Scotland. Quite a few of the national parties in the UK now are saying this is the direction of travel. We work quite a bit with Gus O'Donnell, who used to be the head of civil service, not known as a kind of wild radical, but he is absolutely passionate now that the main aim of government and the main way we measure progress should be around well-being and not GDP. So it's a shifting place. I was in the OECD in Paris last month speaking, and I'd been there before, and it had been quite a low-level meeting. This time the Director General was there, Jeffrey Sachs was there, all these kind of bigwigs in the world of economy, all going, well-being, well-being, well-being. So it's really, really exciting time, and there are more and more opportunities to get involved, and we hope we can make it very practical. So a few little summaries. We need a new compass. Well-being matters. You can measure it, because for a long time you really couldn't. You can measure it, understand and improve it, and I think at least the well-being economics is the future.